Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the ranked agent tier list that I was talking about in the past, and we're going to be covering the practicality of each individual agent. This is technically a part 2 to our class where we talked about how to pick a main. So there's a lot of things that can go back and forth, and using the system that I have set in place, you can decide which agent is good for you and what agents you are willing to try out in the current meta. Just as a big reminder, thank you for everybody that has been liking and watching our videos. Today's class is going to be a little long, so if this is the first time I have you with me, this might be a little bit different. So just kind of sit back, watch, and you can kind of scrub through the video and figure out what exactly it is that you want from a certain role. Maybe you want to look at a particular agent and see what in my humble opinion, fits the agent, and you can kind of go on from there. Just as a big reminder as well, that this is my opinion. There is a lot of things that different people might have about a certain agent. And the second thing that I need to cover is that these agents are different in rank depending on the rank that you're in. So this is, for me, the practicality of each agent regarding an average player's skill level. So for example, anybody that can play the game from a 9 to 5 is going to have a different perspective of how these agents can be played because they have more time to master them. And this is a very important thing to note in regards to the tier list. With that out of the way, let's get started. I'm going to be covering a couple of different pieces of criteria, but before we even talk about this, I do have an announcement to make. We're going to be opening up the slots for anybody that is ready to get coached one-on-one. We have a one-on-one program over here in the Discord. So if you want to just join and kind of do that, feel free to be, joining one of those. We offer 2 sessions per month, and we basically provide support 24/7. So what that means is that if you kind of talk to me on the side, I can offer some answers to questions here and there, but the difference is going to be something as simple as, hey, this is what's happening. Oh, cool. Send me a clip and I'm going to give you some coaching here and there. And it might just be as simple as to me just giving you some pointers in chat, or maybe giving you some homework that you can kind of work through. Anything that will help you further your goal. When it comes to students, the last one that I just had was able to get themselves up from silver 2 all the way to gold 1, which was a very difficult task for them at the beginning, but was able to do so with ease within 3 weeks. And this is the general average of what I see. I believe this student in particular took them 2 weeks, but normally I see it within 1 to 3 weeks. Okay. So if you're kind of interested in that, feel free to just join in the Discord and go ahead and just ask any questions about joining the program. Okay. I'll be here to kind of help you out, and so will the staff. All right. Let's go back to the last thing that we need to cover, which is the criteria. Every single one of these agents are going to be covered based on these 3 pieces of criteria. The viability of the agent. This means how much they can provide for the team, how valuable they can be for the team, and I will generally rank them across other agents either in their pool or maybe potentially across the entirety of the agent roster. And then that kind of ties into the mastery. An agent that can get easy value, but is hard to get a lot of their utility out just simply because of how difficult they may be, is going to be another thing we have to consider. I'm going to be essentially looking at the skill floor of the agent. So if you want to start hounding me because I put Yoru in a particular place, or maybe KO in a particular place because your favorite streamer can make them work really well, this is not necessarily a tier list for them. It is for the average player. And this is how hard it's going to be for you to get that value out of the player. Out of the character. And last but not least, we're going to talk about synergy. Synergy can feel a little bit lax, and this one is where I'm going to take the most liberty with, because the current map pool is going to change, and the way that the meta shifts might change the way that you might play that character alongside others. A good example will be Sage, that I'll talk about briefly when I cover the Sentinels, where I'll talk about that Sage is able to play with most teams, but should you, right? Questions like that will be brought on, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about the agents now. Hopefully we are ready to go. Hopefully no one has any questions. We're going to be talking about the initiators first. The first one that we have to talk about is, the first thing that I really need to cover is that this is another thing that we discussed in the last class, and that is that a lot of the agents that you might see here will be discussed differently from what you see in pro play. We're going to talk about some of the agents that over here do seem really valuable in a pro team setting, but don't seem to be as valuable for them. So for example, Clove, these are the top 15 agents, and we see Clove is only at a 4% pick rate. Reyna, 0%. KO 20%, even though it is an agent that you may or may not get value out of in most maps. You might hate having a KO on your team because they keep flashing you, whereas over here with ease they can make KO work. So what's up with that? We're going to be talking about, again, the average player. So some of the standings may not line up with what you see pros use. So if you want to kind of argue back, hey, my favorite, pro player can make, this agent better, well, that by all means, that is true. And there's definitely some truth to that. But that's not where I'm going to be focusing. Again, average player. Now let's talk about Breach. The first thing that we need to talk about is his viability. He has incredibly easy flashes to get use out of. I think a lot of people know how easy it is to get flashed from Breach. It is very hard for you to basically dodge a flash from Breach if you're not expecting it. In higher elos, it does feel as though his utility is a lot easier to dodge and play around. But when you're looking at the average player, more than often, you're going to be able to get that utility out and get value out of it. However, there are some points that we have to deduct. For example, he lacks information. If you are someone that likes to play with information on the map, or you're someone that likes to know what's going on, Breach may not be for you. But this is where Mastery kind of comes into play, because it's not just a matter of information that he lacks, but it's also how clunky he may feel for some players. Being able to switch back and forth between his utility of flashing and clearing corners to being able to take a fight may seem like there's a little bit of a shift in between that, like, gunplay, right? And this is where some people might struggle with Breach and why he might feel intimidating to some. If you're someone that has map knowledge and you're someone that can easily play around the team and maybe not flash them, Breach may be a good pick for you. When it comes to synergy, he has a really good map pool currently as it stands, and I believe it's going to get only stronger with the two maps that are going to be joining in. Both Split and Pearl are incredible picks for him. So if you're someone that's looking for an agent that has easy value, an easy kit, and you don't mind playing a more supportive role for your team, then he might be for you. But right now, in terms of the scoring, this is basically how I put the score down. We will be looking at the final standing at the end of the video. If you just want to go skip ahead to that, be my guest. The next agent we're going to be talking about is Fade. Fade is one of those agents that was incredibly strong upon being released, but slowly, as time went on, they got more nerfs and other agents just started being a little bit stronger. There's a lot of limitations with the agent in terms of lineups. So when it comes to lineups, it just means that you have to take some time outside of the game. And like I said, if you're not playing this 9 to 5, who has time to learn every single lineup about the agent, right? Other info initiators can actually provide way more than her kit, and that's what makes her a little bit less viable. Now, when it comes to the mastery of the kit, this is where we can talk a little bit about how easy it is. It's actually a very easy kit to learn. It's actually really easy to kind of learn the lineups if you have the time. It's also really easy to kind of like learn the rest of the utility. Like Prowlers are super easy to use. So is the little like pull area, right? The ult is also very easy to use. But again, when it comes to the difference between this agent and the other two info initiators and the two hybrids that we're going to be talking about, she does feel a little lackluster. When it comes to the map pool, it doesn't feel like it's the strongest in comparison to the other two agents such as Sova and Gekko, but maps like Lotus and Ascent are really strong for her. So if you're someone that wants to play Fade, the kit is incredibly easy. If you're someone that is new to the game, Fade is going to be a very easy agent for you to pick up, but when it comes to the mastery of it, you might have to put in a little bit of time on the side. But other than that, the viability may go a little bit higher once you get used to those lineups and that little quirk of how you can kind of stop it in midair. Okay, let's talk about an agent that is actually a little bit stronger. Gekko to me is one of the strongest initiators currently in the current patch. Okay, the meta for him is super easy. His kit, as you can see from mastery, I put it at a 9. It's pretty much, it just plays itself. It's just a plug and play kit where the second you throw a flash, it gives you information on whether there's someone there, whether there's nobody there, whether, there's anything around the corner. It can diffuse, it can plant for you, it can do so many things just for you, and it can also synergize with the maps that are currently in rotation. Out of most of the maps, you can play him in the majority of them, but like 5 of them are more than just playable for him. The fact that he has a massive map pool, he has an incredibly easy kit to use, and is perfect for any type of playstyle with multiple options, makes him a really high tier pick. And this is why you can see that the scoring speaks for itself. If you want to talk about someone that's a little bit more excited towards a particular playstyle, then we can talk about Sova. Sova is, I feel like, a more supportive agent. If you're someone that likes to stay in the back line and support the team, Sova is a perfect pick for you. Now, the reason why I didn't put his viability as high as someone as Gekko is because when we're looking at his kit in particular, it doesn't have as many options. He is more about kind of making sure that the team is doing well, whereas Gekko is just about making sure that everybody else can play around them, but he himself can make that initiative and keep everybody moving. Where it comes with him, I would suggest that you maintain him in the back line as he has really strong high clutching potential. There is still a possibility for the average player to use him as an entry, but I would say still keep him back. I think that he's going to get more impactful with being able to use his darts, but this is where his mastery kind of comes in. I feel like if you don't have any map knowledge, if you don't have any game sense, it's going to be really easy to sort of lose that impact over time. It's really easy to kind of use your dart, but if you don't really know how to use the rest of his kit, you're going to start losing your impact as, you know, your cooldowns start leaving you. Okay. With that out of the way, right, when we look at map synergy, I think that you can put him in any comp. There's really no problems there. But like I mentioned, there's characters like Gekko that can easily overshadow him in some maps over others. If you know that he's a character that's really strong in this map, like for example, Ascent or Ascent or Icebox, then you have an easy pick for you, and he's going to be really strong in that map. In terms of viability, I want you guys to think about him as just that info initiator that stays back. If you lose that, if you start losing, you know, those lineups, or you start losing your cooldowns, his viability slowly starts going down. Keep track of that utility management, and he's going to be a strong pick in most maps. In terms of the other side of things, we can look at Skye. Skye is a hybrid agent. They have both utility for information and utility for just getting, you know, aggressive and flashing opponents. This is what we like to call the hybrid initiator. KO is another example of a hybrid initiator that we're going to be talking about. However, the only reason that Skye is not as high as someone as Gekko is because of nerfs. Constant nerfs have been getting to her, and she's been put in the middle of the pack. And unfortunately, this just means that the kit, despite being incredibly easy and highly impactful, requires you to be mindful of the decisions you're going to make. It is very easy to just make an impact at the beginning of the round, and then later in the round, you have nothing to work with. Okay. When it comes to synergy, there is really nothing when it comes to synergy in terms of her playing with other agents, but the existence of Gekko and Sova just leaves her with something to be desired in terms of who you would pick on that map pool. Remember, back earlier when she was still strong, you could pick her on any map and you would be okay. Now it seems as though you have to make the decision between someone like her and someone that has a little bit more strength and easier output like Gekko or Sova. Okay, keep that in mind when you're picking someone like this character. When we're looking at other characters that have been falling on that same branch, KO fits that same line perfectly. Has had a very similar fate, has been one of the strongest agents initially for climbing, as though they were basically like a pseudo duelist and you can use them to easily shut down plays. But now they've kind of been nerfed into a position where that's no longer the case. The problem with him is his mastery is incredibly low due to his need to know lineups all of the time. If you're someone that doesn't know any lineups, you're going to have a subpar performance. If you're someone that wants to use him as, you know, I'll have some info, but I can just use him as a duelist, I suggest you don't do that. There is just some minimal things that you can do that can make him work well as a duelist, sort of like that pseudo duelist hybrid role. But you are just as good as just picking a duelist and making sure you have better entry potential than using him overall, due to his kit being very easily, you know, avoidable and very easily counterable. And, you know, overall, he doesn't really have much other than that. He does still have some viability, but this is where it starts getting into the synergy. If you don't know those lineups, if you are not aware of the other agents and you want to use KO, if you're not paying attention to those lineups, you're not going to synergize well with teammates. I'm sure that anyone that has been blinded by KO can relate to this, as it is very easy to throw a right click or a left click flash and not hit the mark as to who you're trying to hit. I'm sure players like Toto and Judgment both can make high value and high impact with this character, and they can make these scores a little bit higher up, but it all had to do with time. If you're willing to put time into this agent, he will be very rewarding, but due to how hard it is and how much time you have to put in, you know, the amount of time that you have to put in to get like the viability of the agent out there is not comparable to something like Gekko, where you can just throw it out and you'll be fine. Okay. Gekko can throw it out, doesn't blind the team, whereas he can, and he can blind the team. Look at that difference when you're paying attention to an agent like this one. Let's talk about Duelists. Now that we've talked about the agents in the Initiator category, let's talk a little bit about the Duelists. And we're going to see that Jett is pretty much there. I'm pretty sure that everyone understands the power of Jett, an all-rounder agent with a strong piece of utility for entry. Okay, has a lot of mobility, has able to entry, has a lot of different kit options overall. When we're looking at mastery, we have the eco option of being able to use knives or being able to use dash to maybe get up on close range opponents with maybe a shotgun. But unfortunately, due to the fact that she needs to master knives and requires a high aim capability, it makes her a little bit harder to sort of use and makes her mastery go a little lower. Again, it's really easy to get a dash in and just stay in your smoke as your team entries behind you, and that makes her super easy to use. But in order for you to hit that extra mark, you might have to require a little bit of maybe opping or just knowing the knives a little bit more. If you're not comfortable with either or, the agent is still incredibly rewarding as her viability is super easy to get out of. But if you want to get that extra bang for your buck, those two need to be known. Other than that, you can just put her anywhere. I mean, any map or comp, I don't think there's anyone that's going to complain with a Jett. If there's a map and there's a comp that needs a character, Jett just fits somehow. That just will always fit. Okay, so don't worry too much about that. But let's talk about the other ones. Reyna is kind of on that same boat. The reason you see this 3 or 10 has a little bit to do with the output that she can provide just simply by getting frags. Jett can use smokes for stall, can create one-ways out of nothing, right? Jett can still dash out if something goes wrong. Reyna has none of that. Reyna only has a flash, and if the flash gets shot down, they have nothing else but their aim. The reason that you see the viability being 3 or 10 is because they can either be a nuisance and they can't do anything for your team, or they can completely hyper carry your team simply by being better. The mastery is pretty straightforward. There is some thought process required on terms of like how you're going to use your heal versus your dismiss, right? But other things like just knowing that your flash, it doesn't blind your team, makes it really easy to use. The fact that, you just have to rely on mechanics makes it pretty simple. If you can aim, then the character itself is okay, right? And the ult also doesn't require any thought process. You can just use it at the beginning of the round. There's not a big problem there. It makes it really easy to master, but due to the little wall of having to kind of get over how to aim well, there's going to be some issues there, right? When it comes to synergy, very similar to Jett. If you can click heads, you'll be fine, okay? Their kit is very selfish though, so she doesn't really provide much to synergize with. But if you're someone that can still shoot, you'll be okay. I don't believe that there's much limiting this character other than how strong you are mechanically. But again, her kit's pretty easy to learn. You just have to know how to shoot. Viability can switch between 3 and 10, and we'll see that in the tier list. Yoru falls under the same boat as Reyna, but the problem that you see that viability be, the same but mastery is not, is due to the amount of work you have to put into Yoru. If you've ever put any effort into Yoru, if you put any sort of thought into trying to play Yoru, you'll notice that his kit requires a lot from you. You require insanely high map knowledge, a lot of lineups from your kit. There are a lot of lineups when it comes to TP. You can use it to flank, you can use it to retreat, you can use it to catch opponents off guard, you can use it to kind of get into their spawn, you can use it for rotations, right? There's a lot of things that the TP can be used for. And because of the amount of input you have to put in, can change his mastery from something like higher up like Reyna to something like a 3. This is why you need to be aware of it. If you're not aware of how to use the flash as well, you'll end up just being like a KO that's just flashing around the corner, flashing the team behind you. This is why, despite having a really strong flash, he can still be a nuisance for your team. And that's where his viability can go back and forth and can bounce back and forth. But mastery is still, he's a very tough agent to kind of pick. Right now, his map pool is, I think, really strong. And I think it's going to get stronger as time goes on. Maps seem to be kind of stretching out a little bit more. We're seeing that a little bit with Abyss and, with other characters not filling that same role as he does. So he's going to remain viable. He's going to remain easily to synergize with. However, this is ranked we're talking about. And if you're not aware of your maybe your position, or you're not aware of the people behind you, you can leave people behind, and you can actually quite literally bait people in positions that they didn't want to be in because you TP'd out. That makes this synergy feel a little selfish sometimes when you're trying to play around them. So just be mindful of when you're picking Yoru up. Okay. But other than that, you can get high output. Just be aware of the amount of effort you have to put in to do that. Super fun agent. Just be mindful of the input. Someone like ISO fits along this same margin, as he is just aim labs incarnate. If you're someone that can aim, if you're someone that can shoot, you'll be okay, as he has a lot of things in his kit that makes shooting a lot easier. The reason you don't see a 3 or 10 is simply because he doesn't have anything else to his kit. He has a wall that's easy to play around for both the enemy team and your team. I've seen a lot of your players that kind of like use that wall to bait ISO players into a false sense of security. Okay. So the lack of flash and lack of mobility makes him a little bit harder to sort of get viability out of. But the 6 just simply comes from him being able to shoot. And that's where mastery also ties in. Really easy. If you can shoot, you're fine, right? That's all you really kind of need to do. There is some things that you need to kind of be aware of, though. I didn't really add them in, but the reason that it's not a 10 just due to the fact that you need to aim is because some people will have a really hard time aiming. Some people will have a really hard time getting that part of the game in. But due to how easy it is to get a fight out, due to his shield, you will be fine. And the second part to it is that there are some lineups that you can learn with his uppercut. His weaken is a very strong tool for people that try to synergize with others. And that's what kind of makes him really strong in terms of what you can synergize with. The map pool supports his 1 versus 1 playstyle, but the only reason he's a little bit lower in terms of synergy is because other options feel better to synergize with. And you're kind of forced to synergize with him, but it feels very similar to what Phoenix is going to be like, which I will talk about in just a moment. Raze is an agent that has stayed strong despite the nerfs. Even though you may feel as though they are weaker, that is because of how strong they used to be in the past. Raze is still a very strong agent pick. They have utility to break down opponents' defenses. They have utility to kind of have any combos out there. They have a really easy kit to learn and master, and the utility is just really easy to get value out of. That makes her really valuable and very viable in most comps. The mastery is very easy as well. The problem that it is the 7 is due to 3/4 of her kit being mostly combo abilities or being able to time the utility right so you don't throw it too early due to how easy it is to get value out of. And the second part is satchel movement can be a pain to learn. If you're someone that's not putting any time in, you're going to feel very limited by your movement, and she is a movement agent. If you're someone that only knows the double satchel into sight in a straight line, you're not going to be getting much out of her. So you need to put in a little bit of time to be able to get more pathing and more ways to kind of catch opponents off guard. With a good race player, you'll see that there's any option that you get to play around, you'll be okay in, because there's always a lot of things that you can do in terms of how you are playing around your economy, how you're playing around your ult, how are you playing around other people's ults, and this all comes behind the Raze satchel movement. So be very, very aware of that. When it comes to synergy, the main problem with her is due to some maps being really open. The current map pool, not so much. There's some things you can do with it. The nade combo is also really easy to execute. The problem is there are some maps that may feel a little bit open, or other agents may be a little bit better than her. So for example, if you're picking her on Ascent, not a big deal, but the openness of mid make her feel a little bit, kind of out there and very easy to shoot. Speaking of very easy to use agents, we have Neon. Neon has a low skill floor, meaning that it is very easy to get a lot of value out of. And the recent buffs have made her a lot stronger. If you're someone that really likes that movement ability, you're going to be able to get a lot out of Neon. However, there are some problems with Neon. You need more options than just brute forcing into a site. And this is where mastery also kind of comes in due to movement tech. If you're someone that hasn't touched Neon at all, there's a lot of movement tech that you can use. There's sliding backwards. There's a lot of different ways that you can slide around the map. There's also different things you can use by using your environment to help you out. Without any of those pieces of tech that may or may not be easy to learn for you, depending on who you are as a player, there is, again, that skill expression that might either limit you or make you stronger. And that's why she stands at a strong 8 in terms of viability. When it comes to other things, though, there's not much more options when it comes to that. If your movement is great, you'll be fine. However, what happens if they're countering for that movement? And I've seen a lot of people that are strong on Neon lose games because they don't have any more options. Other agents have other things like verticality. They have flashes, or they have utility to break others' utility and use it for entry. Whereas her, she just has to brute force and use the spacing that their team provides to her advantage. Other than that, when it comes to maps, there's going to be better maps that are going to be coming into the rotation that are going to make her better. But in terms of, like we mentioned, when it comes to the kit, again, you just don't have a lot of options other than just brute forcing it, or so it feels like that sometimes. So it doesn't really have a kit that can synergize with others. Just be mindful of that when you're picking her, but she's still an A tier agent. So don't worry too much about that when you look at the tier list. Phoenix is an agent that I have a love-hate relationship with. If you're someone that's having a hard time picking any agent at all, we've talked about some agents that are relatively easy to learn and master. So for example, we've talked about Gekko, we've talked about Skye, we talked about Fate. Agents that are super easy to learn, super easy to kind of pick up and master. Phoenix falls along that same line. When it comes to him, there's really not much about him that kind of provides any sort of like layering or any type of, sort of things that you can use to make him a little bit more impactful. What you see is what you get. And he is an incredibly slow, low mobility type of agent that can get easy value out of the flashes. If you played against the Phoenix, you know that they're very hard to turn, and it's very easy to catch opponents off guard with the flash. That being said, there's some things that you can do to kind of make his ceiling a little bit higher. If you paid attention to the way that mollies work, you can use that to sort of get some lineups out. There's some ways that you can tech your flash around corners, but other than that, there's really not much you can do to kind of get more out of him. He has a really easy self-sustainable kit that kind of balances out with his easy mastery, but this is where it all kind of comes down to how he synergizes with others. If you've ever played with the Phoenix, you'll know that you have to babysit your Phoenix. You'll know that every single time you're playing with the Phoenix, he has a really easy kit that he can put out, but he is also a very easy target regardless of how easy his kit is. When you're going to be playing with him, they'll be like, hey guys, can you help me get orb? I need orbs so I can use my ult. Hey guys, I'm going to use my ult. Can you watch my body? Hey guys, I'm going to be going in here. Can I have this or that, right? You're going to notice that you have to spoon feed him around sometimes in order to maintain that viability due to, again, how easy it is to use, but how low there is in terms of options. So again, really easy to get value out of due to how easy his kit is to put out, but his synergy does feel a little low with how much you have to play around them in order to make him valuable. Clove, now talking about the controllers, Clove to me is one of the strongest agents in the current roster. Vyze might contend for that spot if you've looked into their kit, but Clove has one of the strongest kits. And it all kind of comes down to the way that the smokes work and how easily flexible Clove is at changing playstyles. When it comes to viability, we talked about value, and it is incredibly easy to get value in ranked games due to how aggressive their playstyle can be. You can change from something as of a more passive, you want to kind of play around your team, help them out with maybe something like a medal, or you can just entry with your team with either an ult or just being able to proc any of your movement abilities. When you're looking into that and looking into the passive, you're always going to get value out of Clove regardless of any playstyle or state that the game is in. Currently, Clove has one of the strongest viabilities in the game and easiest masteries in the game. As long as you're aware of a little bit of a cooldown management and you understand how smokes work, just in general, knowing how to smoke chokes, you'll be okay. Most of the time, people will tell you where they want the smoke on defense, so you don't really need to think about that all too much. The kit is very easy to learn, and when it comes to synergy, most maps are playable with Clove. If you're someone that doesn't want to play Viper on a map that requires Viper, if you don't want to play a map that requires maybe two controllers that are a little bit more utility intensive, you'll still be fine. Clove has enough utility to back up the lack of maybe utility that other characters will bring due to, again, the impact of the fragging potential. So Clove is a good pick for anybody that is ready to kind of like rank up just due to like just brute forcing enough impact each round. When it comes to Astra, I feel as though Astra is one of those characters that are feeling a little bit weaker as the meta's going on. They're still a universal controller. However, the nerfs have put her in a position where she has a low star count, in my opinion. I do think that she is in need of a buff. However, that doesn't mean that she can't really be valuable. She's still very, very viable in terms of how she can create setups on defense and how she can impact teams on entry. But due to that position, she can be a little bit harder to master. If you're not someone that knows how to resource manage all of your kit, you're going to be struggling a lot of the time. Smoking is half the battle, and if you're not paying attention to the rest of your stars, you might be missing out on a lot of impact that she can provide. It's the same thing with Clove, right? If you're not looking at the rest of your kit, you might miss out on some things, but when it comes to Astra, it is very easy to miss out a lot more of your impact as opposed to Clove, just due to how you have to manage your stars. When it comes to synergy, you can pick her in any comp. I feel like regardless of the map, same thing with Clove, you can pick her in any comp, and due to the fact that she has a universal smoker, you'll be fine 9 out of 10 times. So don't worry too much about where you pick her. It's about managing that utility that makes her difficult. When it comes to the Harbor, I don't think he's got anything wrong with him. It's just the way that people like to play the current maps. It's just the way that people like to play around the meta. The meta simply is, how do you play around the Sentinels? How do you play around that? How do the Duelists like to play around that? The meta in terms of how people like to entry tends to be pretty similar to what you see in ranked, right? Sorry, in pro play, in which you have to destroy utility before you enter in. And you're going to notice that even though his utility is super easy to grasp and his ultimate is very easy to use, people tend to like the usage of the orb smokes just a little bit more due to how versatile they can be. Right? You can still use him on defense as a really strong form of defense and use him for delay and for stall. But other than that, it does feel like there's something to be desired. His map pool is going to feel limited just because of that reason. But if you're someone that likes to play in double controller setups, incredibly easy character to use, super hard to kind of mess up with him. The only thing that you have to kind of pay attention to is how long your wall, your signature ability is going to be. But other than that, in comparison to other agents, he does feel lackluster. And that's the problem. But again, just in terms of how you play him, can change the way that you get your value out of him. And just in general, in comparison to another character like Omen, you might miss out on some of the things that he can do. When we look at Viper, we have to kind of pay attention to the threat that she provides just simply by existing. If you're someone that likes to play as a Sentinel controller and you like those two roles, Viper is perfect for you. The problem is that, very similar to that of Harbor, she can lack a little bit of versatility. She's kind of just stuck on one site most of the time. And when it comes to other sites, you can have setups that can make her work. And that's what makes her mastery a little bit tougher to use. If you don't have any wall setups, if you don't have any lineups, if you don't have anything in terms of what you could do with that, she's going to feel very limiting and only works in the maps that she's good in. And that's why out of synergy, she's the strongest out of the two wall agents and is very easy to synergize with because of those things. But if you don't master any lineups or any setups, you're basically not going to be doing much. Even though it's really easy to kind of get that value out of just with those setups, you can go on YouTube and learn one setup and you immediately become a threat. But if you didn't put that time in and you didn't put that effort in, you're going to be losing out on a lot of potential with this agent. Looking at Omen, in my opinion, he's one of the strongest characters available to the current pool. And he's actually one of the characters that I do agree with in terms of what the pros are using. He's a really easy character to get value out of. He is both useful for selfish and team-centric players. And his flash is the easiest thing you're going to use. There's nothing that you can do about that flash when it comes to predicting it other than just kind of playing away from its range. And when it comes to playing against a good Omen, there's just way too many options. There's a lot of things that we kind of have to pay attention to when it comes to his mastery. I do recommend that a lot of you kind of just learn some basic knowledge in terms of his controller usage and you'll be fine. One last thing to note about Omen is that his utility is really easy to kind of use. And if you're playing in ranked, very similar to Clove, you can always get that pseudo duelist value out of him. It's really easy to get value just from the flash, very easy to get value out of the ult, very easy to get value out of the TP. There's really not a lot of tech that you have to be aware of other than one-ways. But if you are not someone that is aware of which one-ways you can do, they can be a bit painful to kind of do for your team. Other than that, maybe paying attention to smoke timings might be something that does take away from his mastery. He has a strong viability, he's very easy to learn, and he is very easy to synergize with in terms of most maps. Looking at a character like Brimstone, I do believe that he is in a position where other characters will outclass him just because of where he is at. If you're someone that wants to learn the controller role, Brimstone is the perfect character for you. His viability is not necessarily that he isn't good at getting value. It's just that in comparison to other controllers, it is very easy to get outclassed. He doesn't provide as much to the table other than just being a stepping stone into learning other controllers, as he can teach you the timings of someone pushing in and then being able to stall. But other than the molly and maybe some lineups that you can use, that's about it. You can get a lot of easy output from him just simply by understanding that putting a smoke down on a choke and keeping that timing, and just continually recycle those 3 smokes into a choke. So one of the things that I want you guys to be aware of, the only reason that he isn't a higher mastery despite being super easy to use is because you still have to put some time into lineups. And that's really just about it. If you don't really put attention into lineups, if you don't put attention into things like getting any output from any smokes or being able to be aware of your range, if you're not aware of any of those things, you're going to struggle with him just a tad. And that's what may create a huge stepping stone for controller players into getting into other classes. But other than that, I think he's a pretty easy controller to use for most people. He's also the first controller you get access to, so that's something to kind of work with. In terms of synergy, really easy to synergize with, and he is the strongest pick, in my opinion, for a lot of double controller comps, as he can also serve as a good stall tool for anybody that wants to use them sort of as a pseudo sentinel in some way, shape, or form. When we're talking about Sage, I hate to say it, Sage is one of the characters that you have really easy mastery of. You can very easily learn the character. There's some things that you can do to kind of increase the output of the character. But in terms of other Sentinels, it is very lackluster. There's really no map control with the character. You kind of have to make sure that you're watching your back when you do have a Sentinel like Sage. Some maps do offer strong potential. So for example, Split, really good strong potential. Maybe a map like Bind, you could get something out of that. But she doesn't provide as much impact as the other Sentinels, and that's what provides a low viability score. When it comes to the map pool, if we're picking strictly just for synergy or just for picking the character as opposed to other Sentinels, very limited map pool. Does that mean that Sage is trash? Not really. You can still do great things due to how easy it is to master the character. But again, in comparison to other Sentinels, in comparison to picking a character that is not KJ's or that is not a character like Cypher, you might suffer a little bit in terms of losing that value. So just be very mindful when you're picking this character, as you can use them sort of like as a duelist. And in terms of the rest of the kit, you don't really have much more to kind of work with. So I would suggest that you guys pay attention to this part of the character themselves. I don't think that she is terrible, but I do think she needs a buff. So that's why you might see her a little bit lower on the list. Now, Deadlock was a difficult agent to rank. The viability of her kit and her utility is extremely high due to how a lot of players are still getting used to her kit. However, due to how easy it is to use, there's always a drawback, and that's that it has a high skill curve. One of the main things that I see Deadlock players use is her trips to kind of try to catch flanks and always try to catch players off guard. The problem is, due to the lack of map awareness and how easy it is to bypass these trips, it is very easy to sort of lose value out of the character. If you're someone that likes to pick characters that have a high skill curve, this character is very rewarding in how easy it is to get value out of the kit. The wall, one of the key components of her kit, is also really easy to use and also really easy to misuse. And due to that, she's going to have a low mastery score. If you have a lack of map awareness and you are someone that hasn't really thought about the way that the maps work and the way that players like to play around the map and the way that people like to play around your elo, you might have some differences in how much mileage you can get out of her kit. When it comes to synergy, her map pool can feel limited due to other characters existing, such as Cypher and KJ, that we will get to in just a second. And the second component is that she lacks strong anti-flank utility. Like we just mentioned, if you're not really looking into the map and you're not looking at the minimap and you're not aware of how players are moving around, you're going to lack a lot of components that other characters can do much easier and a lot better. But due to her kit, she's someone that you can get a lot of value out of. You just have to learn them. Very similar to something like Yoru, you can get a lot out. You just have to put in the time. Speaking of characters that have a low mastery score, but are unable to stay viable, Chamber is that unfortunate character that does not fit well within the meta. There's a lot of things that are happening currently, and there's a lot of utility being used. We're currently in a utility-based meta where a lot of characters just rely on more utility to get the job done. A character that is just aim-focused like Chamber doesn't really get as much out, whereas something like KJ, someone like Cypher is just going to have an easier time. When it comes to his kit, all of it is revolving around his aim and around his utility of being able to hit headshots. If you are not able to do that, unlike a character like ISO that basically gives you a free shield so you can get that headshot, it's going to feel as though you are basically leaving very little room for error, and you're going to get caught off guard if you're not prepared. Since a lot of his value comes from his aim-related mastery, you're going to have a hard time making an impact if you're not constantly getting kills. In comparison to other Sentinels that can fulfill his role better than him, it is much better for you to pick a different character that can do a lot more and does not require as much involvement in order to maintain a high value score. When you're looking at him, it also does feel like you need to op in order for him to stay relevant, and the trip is really easy to bypass now that there's range, and he doesn't really have much more other than maybe he can get a pick occasionally, whereas a Duelist can just do that job better, and a Sentinel can do a lot more for their team. In terms of synergy, I'm not really quite sure what else he can provide. He's a really strong anchor, and that's about it. When it comes to other things that he can do, it kind of feels limiting due to other agents being able to synergize much better than he can, and it doesn't feel worth keeping him around when, again, there are better options. He is going to be on the lowest portion of the list, and you're going to be able to easily see that due to, again, how hard it takes for him to get any viability and any value out of his kit, and due to how little impact he creates. All that does provide a character that has seen the age of time, and a lot of nerfs have made him hard to work with. So this is where we talk about the big two. Both Cypher and KJ are going to be characters that are going to feel like they're, the yin and the yang. You're going to notice that the score here could be different depending on how you play the character. But again, we're just going to try to look at them as objectively as possible. When it comes to viability between the two characters, they're very closely related. It's one of those things where the characters are revolving around controlling a zone, and they both do it extremely well. When it comes to Cypher, he's really good at shutting down a particular choke and a particular site. If you're not really paying attention to the rest of the map, you're still going to be fine, but it does feel like there's other things that you could do about it, whereas KJ can very easily hold down 2 chokes. That's why I didn't really give him a 10 in terms of his value. But here's the deal. His kit is extremely easy to use and has incredibly high value just by using a trip, for example. If you use a trip, now the enemy has to either think about the counterplay, has to use utility to counter you, and other ways to kind of play around you. There's a lot of times that you'll see a KJ and still feel like you can still push the site, whereas a Cypher you feel like you have to be more cautious around. That's already providing value. However, when it comes to mastery, this is where things get a little bit dicey. When it comes to Cypher, his mastery is purely related with how good you are at adapting. A lot of outplay potential really relies on how strong you are as a player to notice that players are adapting to you and be able to outplay them back. This is why you see a lot of people like, for example, anchors that don't really know what they're doing, stay in their site for too long and see no usage of their kit for maybe 6 out of 12 rounds in a half. This is why you see Cypher players feel like they're not really being impactful and everybody else is being pushed onto the other side and they're not really able to do anything about it. Not to mention that this is where, again, the outplay potential starts coming in. You may be thinking, I'm getting value out of people destroying my trips, but now that your trips are broken, can you hold down the site? And his value can tiptoe between being really good and really strong to someone that's just very easily getting countered. Depending on where you put the value of people ruining a lot of their utility and just using it a little earlier than they need to, as opposed to them being able to take the site as a result of it, all comes down to the player and how good they are at adapting. When it comes to synergy though, really easy. You can put him down in almost every map. I don't think anyone's going to have a problem if you just insta-lock Cypher. It's one of those characters that you can easily use and hold down chokes and hold down sites. Not to mention that his range makes him extremely easy to flank watch with, and his range makes it really easy to flank with. You can flank, you can lurk, all of these things are extremely easy with him. But again, we have to pay attention to the other side of this coin. What does KJ provide that he doesn't? And that's why his score isn't necessarily a 10 out of 10. There just seems like there's other things that you can do with him. Sure, you can use him with entry with like his cages on attack, but again, there's really not much there, and it seems as though he's just one-sided on defense, and on attack, there's really not just much more to work with. Again, that outplay potential changes this character a lot. If you're not putting attention and any work into how you're playing on attack, he's going to start getting limited. But again, due to how easy it is to get value out of his kit, due to how easy it is to master, and due to how easy it is to just pick him, you can just easily play with this character, no problem. Now let's look at the other side. When we're looking at KJ, this one, again, was difficult to rank. When we're looking at the character, let's start at the beginning on synergy. When it comes to the maps currently on rotation, you can actually pick Cypher more times than you can pick KJ. They both share similar synergy in terms of how you can use them in a map, and it's just completely a matter of playstyle. When you're looking at the map pool, however, and we're paying attention to how Cypher does provide more than KJ, we need to also look at how they're really good on the opposite side, for example, on attack. This is where viability comes in. When we're looking at the difference between KJ and Cypher, KJ has a little bit of a weaker setup when it comes to defense, just slightly weaker. But when it comes to attack, she does have more value. She has entry potential, she has strong setup potential, she has strong adaptation potential on both sides of the map. And this is why I prefer to pick her over Cypher, as I feel like I have way more tools in my kit to be able to work on either side, whether it's attack or defense. She can control multiple lanes like we talked about, just simply by being AFK. You can just keep yourself in one area of a corner, and as long as you're playing within your range, you'll be okay, as a turret can provide information from a longer range, and you can still have something like your weaken from the alarm bot providing another area, by controlling that area. And this is where, again, we have to look at how that viability can change, like Cypher. We talked about range. Mastery does become a little bit more difficult, as it is very easy to make her setups work. There is a little bit of room to play with how you can use the mollies or how you want to play around with the alarm bot. But due to the range, you need to have a little bit more map awareness to fully min-max her kit on attack, as there's a lot of things that you can't do purely due to the fact that you're going to lose a lot of flank watch potential, and maybe even your utility is going to go down as a result. Lastly, as opposed to Cypher, the ult does come in a little later. It is a very invaluable tool, and you can do a lot of things with it, such as faking sites, getting other ults out of them, and potentially just getting a free site because of it. Whereas Cypher can get the ult a lot more frequently and is really good at clutching rounds, but again, it's just that outplay potential that fully depends on the character. When it comes to both characters, though, they're both really easy to pick up. The setup's really easy to understand and learn. But again, both require a little bit of understanding on either map awareness or just the outplays that an enemy might do, so therefore adaptation, right? So synergy, they're both the same. You can pick either or. You can pick either of them as you wish. Just be mindful of those two differences. Now let's talk about the tier list. If you've been jumping back and forth, you've been able to see that the majority of the characters fit along the line of the A tier. So what does this mean? It means that the majority of the characters are actually very strong and viable in comp. So if you're someone that doesn't have any idea on who to pick, most of the time you're going to be, on average, okay with the character that you have chosen. As long as you're aware of the limitations that you have sort of like kind of looked into, maybe the things that I talked about in this video, you'll see that most of the time there's just some things that you have to work around that will make your character strong. We talked about, for example, Neon. Can brute force sites, has a really strong duelist kit, but again, if you're not really paying attention to how the enemy is responding or how your team is playing around you, you might have some problems. Characters that are in the S tier will have some sort of value in some way, shape, or form that is just outside of just their kit. It's just their presence alone. We talked about the Sentinels. We talked about how the controllers just provide value with their kit really easily and can still output even more just by understanding just a little bit more in terms of their kit. And we talked about Jett and Gekko in general as to how their kits are, again, really easy to use and get output from. So again, if you're someone that's looking for a character to main, you don't know which one to start with, these three rows here are going to be really good for you. When it comes to the lower row though, you're going to notice that these ones here, there's going to be a limitation as to how people are playing this role, or there's going to be a limitation as to how the other roles get to be played. We talked about Reyna, how Reyna can either be really strong or weaker just due to the fact that they don't provide anything else. In fact, the list might change over time. If you have any questions or any concerns or anything in regards to this list, hey, I think this character should be higher, put it in the comments. I'm always down to have a conversation. But overall, these are the characters that I think fit the majority of, the A tier, and this is how I believe that they should be scored. If you're picking any of the characters in the lower area, again, there's some mastery required. There's going to be something you have to be putting in besides just learning the game. You have to treat it like a job, and it sucks. But other than that, I do think that you're going to be picking a character that's going to be mostly viable or very valuable to the team, and that's okay. So with that out of the way, we're going to be concluding the class. For anybody back at home that is watching this as the VOD is being uploaded, thank you guys for watching. Yet again, if you have any questions, feel free to come into the Discord, link in the description. And if you have any questions in regards to the tier list, and if you think that anybody should be higher or lower, let me know in the comments.